Hello, everyone. This is Ted Slafsky, publisher and CEO of 340B Report, your inside source for information on the 340B drug discount program. Welcome to the 5th episode of our podcast, where we feature conversations between me and our editorial team about the latest developments in the 340B drug discount program. I'm joined today by my colleague Shannon Young, who is the associate editor. Hello, Shannon.
Hi, Ted. Great to be here.
And Will Newton, another associate editor on our team. Hi, Will.
Hey, how's it going? Excited for the podcast?
Excellent. And our national correspondent coming from the Big Apple, New York City, Bella Czajkowski. How are you, Bella?
Hi, Ted. I'm good. I'm excited for this week. Thanks.
Excellent. Well, good. We've got a lot to discuss today. Before I begin talking about the topics we're going to cover, I do want to mention that our next webinar will be on December 3rd from 12 to 1 Eastern. We have a great group of speakers, including Josh Trent, who was the former health counsel for the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which oversees the 340B program and a number of other important healthcare programs. Josh is an advisor to the 340B Working Table, which is a very unique coalition of hospitals, health centers, and drug companies working together to try to come up with solutions to address issues related to the 340B program. They've been deeply involved in the drafting of the Sustained 340B Act, and Josh has been involved in 340B for many, many years. I remember lobbying him when I worked at 340B Health. We're also very lucky to have my former colleague, Amanda Smith, who will be joining us. Amanda, many of you in the hospital will remember Amanda. She was a longtime lawyer and lobbyist at 340B Health. She is now an attorney at the law firm K&L Gates. And then finally, last but not least, looking forward to hearing from Peggy Tai. Peggy is at Powers Piles Southern Verville, a law firm here based in Washington, D.C., and she does a lot of work in the 340B area, including serving as counsel and advisor to Ryan White Clinics for 340B Access, the HIV group that participates in the 340B program. So that will be a great session. Stay tuned. We will be sending out an announcement soon about that event. And it's a subscriber-only event. So if you're not a subscriber, make sure to use the code webinar25 to get a 25% discount to subscribe at 340B Report and take advantage of this great discussion that we're going to have on the 3rd of December. And with that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're going to cover today. We're pretty excited. There have been a lot of developments in the 340B program. There was this little thing about a week or two called the elections. That was a major deal. We now have the outcome of the election, and we know that President Trump won fairly decisively, winning all 7 battleground states. Well, a number of those states were close elections. It is pretty telling that President Trump was able to win all 7 of those important battleground states. So he comes in with a bit of a mandate. We also have a new Senate that is controlled by the Republicans taking over the House. And then we also have some big developments in the House where Shannon just reported yesterday that the House Republicans will be in the majority, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that majority and how narrow it will be and what that means for the 340B program. So with that, I think we're going to also talk about one other issue today, and that's the Johnson & Johnson effort to try to change the way how 340B discounts work. Instead of having discounts at the upfront level, it would be done through a back-end rebate. The HRSA has not been a fan of this approach and did not approve of it. And as a result, J&J just decided this week to sue. and I'm going to be learning more from Will, who's been doing a lot of reporting on this, why they decided to go ahead now. What are you thinking there, Will? What have you heard?
Yeah, definitely. So I remember said this a couple episodes ago that just because J&J withdrew its rebate did not mean that was the end of the story. And this lawsuit here is sort of bearing that out. So on November 12th, J&J sued HRSA for threatening enforcement action that, as you said, led J&J to withdraw its proposed rebate model. And one thing that was particularly striking from reading the lawsuit, and more importantly, from talking to some 340B attorneys who have read through and analyzed the lawsuit, is that J&J not only put forth a lot of legal arguments defending its rebate model, but it also dedicated considerable time to sort of making a policy case for why there should be a 340B rebate, and also spent a lot of time justifying its rationale for a 340B rebate. So it does really seem as though when J&J went forward and wrote this lawsuit that they had multiple audiences in mind, one being obviously the judge who will rule on the legal merits, but the other one being sort of the broader 340B stakeholder and policymaker community. And so this lawsuit very much seems like J&J really laying out its case for why it feels that HRSA was wrong and that a rebate model is the best way forward for the program.
And, that's interesting, Will, because, despite the broad bipartisan support for the current model, which is that upfront discount, as you guys have reported, close to 190 U.S. House makers recently wrote a letter to Secretary Becerra urging him to penalize the drug industry if they try a rebate model. It sounds like that is not ending their efforts. In fact, I saw this week in Politico, they have a very popular newsletter that covers healthcare policy. In that newsletter, it's being sponsored by my old organization, 340B Health, and the message is that rebates are really unfair to hospitals and other providers in the program, and it would end up costing healthcare providers lots of money to have to pay much higher prices at the beginning, and then have to hope for a rebate down the road from a drug company. So
Yeah, definitely.
clearly this is, clearly this is not over.
Yeah, and as you said, I think if we look back to September 30th when J&J sent the letter to HRSA saying that it had no choice but to forego implementation of its rebate model. At that point, HRSA was very clearly against a rebate model. As you said, all of these bipartisan lawmakers were clearly against the rebate model. And now we look, J&J filed this lawsuit on November 12th. And so I think clearly the main thing that's changed between then and now is the elections. And so this, from speaking to a lot of attorneys, seems to be potentially timed to go forward with the new administration and sort of see and test whether this new administration will change its position on rebates and see if a more manufacturer-friendly HHS or HRSA under the new Trump administration might reverse course. Again, this would be reversing course of nearly 30 years of precedent of HRSA requiring secretarial approval to implement a rebate model and not approving unilateral manufacturer rebates. But as we all sort of know, Trump administration is not exactly known for highly regarding prior precedent. So that could be a reason why J&J is actually filing this lawsuit now.
Yeah, well, I think
Right.
that's a good point. There's actually, there's reason to suspect that the Trump administration could be more open to a rebate model. Ted and I attended that conference in New York City. We talked about a couple episodes ago, back the other month, and we heard from Joe Grogan, who was the former director of the White House's Domestic Policy Council and assistant to Trump. And Grogan said that, there's definitely 340B reform needed, and he briefly mentioned the possibility of a back-end rebate model. Grogan's one of several names being circulated for a position in the Trump administration and potentially even for the Health and Human Services Secretary.
Yeah, that's really an important point to bring Bella, because it's unclear whether Joe Grogan will end up joining the administration as opposed to Joe Rogan, who you never know could end up being the next press secretary. God knows. But Grogan is a longtime critic of the 340B program. He's worked on Capitol Hill. He's worked in Republican administrations and played such a senior role in domestic policy for President Trump. If he does, and was a lobbyist for Gilead and Amgen. So he is sympathetic to the drug industry, and it described 340B during that conference that you and I attended as 340B is out of control. So that is not a great sign, but perhaps Joe will not go back into public service. But there are others who may have that same feeling as him that will be joining the administration. I know, Shannon, you've been following what's going on Capitol Hill. Tell us a little bit about some of the developments there.
Yeah, so just to recap, not only do we have Republicans in control of the White House come January with President-elect Donald Trump winning a second term, but Republicans are also taking control of the Senate, which right now Democrats hold a slight majority there, and Republicans are also holding on to control of the House. And so in both chambers, it looks like we're going to have really tight margins, which means one of two things. One, they could all work together and pass a lot of legislation that is important for Republicans and President Trump, or there could be infighting that delays a lot of things, and they might have to be forced to work with Democrats, especially in the House right now. We're still waiting on the results to come in on a few of those races, but the margin could come down to about 5-6 seats, and with at least 3 House Republicans being named as potential administration officials, it's kind of, we got to wait and see what happens there, if there's going to be special elections or who fills those seats and how long they're unoccupied for. Of course, that's all going to depend on the confirmation process. And so it's kind of going to be an interesting thing to watch. Last time when Trump took control of the White House, he had both chambers of Congress and still struggled to pass certain legislation due to tight margins. And so whether that happens again is something that we're all going to just kind of be waiting and see.
That's right. And it's going to be really interesting, because I will tell you the previous Trump administration certainly was not friendly to the 340B providers, from everything from significant Medicare Part B cuts, 30% cuts to hospitals in the program, to requirements that the health centers bill uninsured and other vulnerable patients at nothing but acquisition cost for insulin and EpiPens. That idea ended up never becoming law, but it was something that the president had proposed as an executive order. Those are just a few of President Trump's ideas on 340B. He described it as a program that actually increases drug prices. So certainly a different look than the previous administration that has been very friendly to the 340B program. And I know providers in Washington and throughout the country in the 340B program are quite nervous about this change in administration.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see, especially in the Senate, where just recently John Thune, who's a Republican senator from South Dakota, was just elected to be the next majority leader. So he takes over from Mitch McConnell, who's held the seat for more than 20 years, or almost 20 years. And so Thune has been a champion of 340B advocates and providers. He's been a pretty reliable proponent of 340B issues in the Senate. He's one of the 6 sponsors of the Sustain Act, which we still haven't seen released yet, but we hope maybe to see in the next couple weeks before the new Congress convenes, just to get a sense of where things are heading with that. Though also in the Senate, we have Bill Cassidy now the chairman of the Help Committee come January. And Bill Cassidy has been the complete opposite of Thune when it comes to 340B. He's been a really vocal critic. He's launched probes as the ranking member of the Help Committee, looking at drug makers, hospitals, providers, just raising questions. And he doesn't really have a ton of power right now. A lot of those inquiries are voluntary given his rank in the minority, but that will change come January. And so we could see more hearings, probes that actually have some teeth, and a lot of focus on 340B program and how providers are using those savings.
Yeah, that's right, Shannon. I've known Senator Thune for close to 30 years now, and I know he's a big fan of the program. He's very close with the hospitals and health centers and other participants in the program, particularly in the state of South Dakota. Have been to many visits with Senator Thune on Capitol Hill during my times at 340B Health, and I would escort the South Dakota hospitals to those meetings. And what I was struck by was that unlike many visits on Capitol Hill where you might meet with a junior staffer or maybe the chief of staff if you are bringing in constituents from back home, we always met with the senator personally. And so he knows the program well. I know he's going to be very, very busy in his new role as a majority leader running the Senate. But I don't think his support of 340B is necessarily going to wane. But we shall see. So I do think that he will still be. He'll still care deeply about particularly his South Dakota hospitals and grantees. And so that will temper some of the efforts by Senator Cassidy, who, as you described him accurately, is the polar opposite on 340B and is really quite concerned with the program and is very vocal in his criticism, particularly of the hospitals in the program and some of the other parties in the program, particularly chain drugstores.
Yeah, and I know Will's done a lot of reporting on that. Will, can you give us a little bit of background here on Cassidy's investigations into 340B?
Yeah, definitely. So Cassidy, over the past year or so, has sent out letters as part of what he calls an investigation into 2 hospital systems, 2 health centers, and then 2 large chain pharmacies with contract pharmacy businesses. And these letters basically sought information about how all of them use their 340B revenue, and also outlined concerns that he has with program growth and potential abuses. So I spoke with an attorney who has a congressional practice, and he basically said that these investigations technically are not investigations right now because Cassidy is currently the ranking member, so he's part of the minority party right now, and so those investigations did not have subpoena power. However, now that he is going to be the chair, he will have much more authority to formalize these investigations. And he's spent so much time collecting them that it's very likely that these are the precursor to some actual legislation related to the 340B program. Cassidy also sent 2 letters to 2 drug manufacturers, Amgen and Eli Lilly, that were ostensibly a continuation of this inquiry. Although, as I know Bella's done some reporting, they didn't necessarily ask the most hard-hitting questions to drug makers, and there's been some concerns by some 340B analysts that these letters sort of basically gave drug makers the opportunity to vocalize some of their concerns with the program in sort of an official congressional way. And I know, Bella, you've reported on this and potentially tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, well, thanks. So, as you mentioned, there have been multiple rounds of letters. These letters to the drug manufacturers went out in late September, and they asked a couple things. One, they asked that the manufacturers explain the justification for the contract pharmacy restrictions that they've written, because the drug manufacturers are alleging widespread program fraud within 340B, and they say that these restrictions are meant to curtail said fraud. So he's both looking for some insight there, and also he met some. He's this being like the last round of letters, we've been able to see compare a little bit between the inquiries to the various stakeholders, and his message to the drug industry met some criticism by other stakeholders, including providers, for being a little bit too softball. They felt like he was scrutinizing the provider community, for example, a little bit more than these drug manufacturers in this inquiry. However, on the flip side, the drug industry, including pharma, they praised the inquiry and Cassidy's interest in learning more about the program. And a Lilly spokesperson said at the time that they appreciate the investigation into the, quote, increasingly opaque and broken 340B program. So I guess we'll see. Some stakeholders think this could be a pretext for supporting rebate models like the one that J&J's proposed that we discussed. So we'll have to see. Like Will said, this investigation could ramp up with the leadership change, and we will keep an eye out for further action.
Yeah, Senator Cassidy has not only has been a longtime critic of the 340B program, he's been a big advocate for the drug industry. And is considered one of the most reliable allies here in Washington. So that is certainly something that is giving providers additional pause and concern about next steps. I personally anticipate there to be hearings sometime shortly after the Senate gets going in this winter, and that there will be some fairly tough hearings on the 340B program, not only in the Senate but also in the House. Tell us a little bit more about where we stand in the House and where the White House might be headed next when it comes to who they might appoint and what the next steps are. And tell us a little bit more about the House Energy and Commerce Committee, because I know that's the committee of jurisdiction, Shannon, for 340B. And that's been one that is another committee that's not always been so great on 340B, particularly under GOP control.
Yeah, so in the House, we have a little bit less clear picture than the Senate when it comes to 340B policy. As of this recording, we don't know who's going to lead the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which Ted noted oversees all sort of 340B related bills. Kathy McMorris Rogers, who's the current chairperson, did not seek re-election. So, we are still waiting to hear who her replacement will be. A couple names that have been thrown out from some members currently on the committee includes Brett Guthrie, who's a Republican from Kentucky, and Bob Latta, who's a Republican from Ohio. They both chair subcommittees. So Guthrie chairs the Health Subcommittee and Latta chairs the Communications and Technology Subcommittee of the E&C Committee. And so, it's kind of unclear how they would approach it as chair and how much focus the 340B program would get. But if Cassidy's, putting up the heat on them in the Senate, the House might choose to follow suit. And especially if we're seeing any movement on any bills, then we could definitely expect to see some big hearings in the House as well. And then in terms of the administration, as Bella mentioned, we've heard that Joe Grogan could be a potential HHS secretary. There's a handful of other names that have been thrown out, including RFK Jr., so Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is a well-known anti-vax activist, and he's somebody who is not necessarily well-liked by the drug industry. And so, we'll see Trump's administration or his transition team have been a little bit cagey in terms of what position he could see in an administration. But I know it's definitely a hot topic in Washington, and something, Bella, that you've heard too at recent conferences, right?
I'd like to take a moment to thank our Ultra Diamond sponsors for helping to make this podcast possible. Our 2024 Ultra Diamond sponsors are AIDS Healthcare Foundation, the Alinea Group, Avita Care Solutions, Maxor, RX Paradigm, RX Strategies, and Verity Solutions. You will be learning more about our Ultra Diamond sponsors in the future, but I wanted to make sure to thank them for their leadership role in supporting 340B Report.
But like we talked about earlier, Grogan could be called up for a leadership position under the next Trump administration. We heard from him briefly about RFK Jr., though, also at the conference that Ted and I were at recently. He actually sort of defended RFK Jr.'s stance against vaccines and said that, our public health institutions during the pandemic seem to have done more damage to public trust and hope around vaccines than anything that RFK Jr. has said or done on the matter. So it's obviously quite a bold claim. And we'll have to keep an eye out and see who the leader ends up being.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I do want to emphasize that I don't think that Joe Grogan was necessarily saying that vaccines are a bad thing. I think what he said, what he was trying to get across was that he felt like the government did a big overreach and that they were requiring children to get the vaccines and being just too involved in sort of more of a nanny type of state. And he said that, he understood that RFK and sympathized with the idea that people should have more individual freedom. Now, I don't necessarily say yes or no whether that's a good idea, but I don't want to get the impression that he necessarily is against vaccines. I just think he feels like there was too much of an aggressive approach.
Yeah, agreed.
To make
agreed, Ted. I think his bottom line was that he kept emphasizing that it would have been better for Americans to have more data about how effective vaccines are, that then they can make decisions by, instead of having so many widespread claims made that then people were questioning the effectiveness of the vaccine afterwards.
Yeah, and I do think that that may have had an impact on the elections. COVID wasn't too long ago, and there's a lot of anger in the country that some people felt like there was completely overkill when it came to trying to protect the country. Now, of course, this is easy to do in hindsight, and we were in an unprecedented pandemic. But nonetheless, I think that is a viewpoint that resonates in the country and one that I think we all need to be aware of and understand. With that, I think we're going to wrap up for this episode. I know we have a lot to cover in the next 2 weeks before our next podcast. I will say once again that we are having a webinar for our subscribers on the elections and what to expect next. And that will be on December 3rd at 12 p.m. Eastern. You will be getting information about how to subscribe shortly. And that is only for those who are subscribers to 340B Report. And another exclusive benefit that you get as a 340B Report subscriber. And with that, I want to say thank you to Will and Shannon and Bella. And thank you again, everyone. And please pass the word about our podcast. Thank you. 340B Report is your indispensable source for news and intelligence on the 340B program. We are pleased to offer a special discount of 25% off for first-time subscribers. Go to the subscribe tab at 340breport.com and use coupon code podcast25. I know you will find our news service to be a valuable investment. Thank you.